Hello everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed the session so far. My name's Akash Raja and I'm the president of the Marshall Society. Now the conference really is our flagship event, and what we hope is that through today's conference, it will be a platform for many more to come and will bring us that much closer to our goal of furthering interest in economics. And it is with a pleasure that I'm able to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ricardo Fuentes Nieva, Head of Research for Oxfam Great Britain. In this position, Ricardo plays a pivotal role in evaluating the campaigns that Oxfam runs in many countries across the world. Indeed, I quote from one of his blogs, "Working for Oxfam is easy. You just have to ask two questions. Is this problem or injustice true? And how can I help change it?" And this truly is testament to the work that Ricardo and Oxfam does. Now, Ricardo began his career in the Center for Research and Teaching in Economics in Mexico as a research assistant, where he looked at many issues such as household savings, income distribution, and social security reform. He then moved to the research department of the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C., and produced projects on, to name a few, crime, income poverty, social mobility, and returns to education. Following his subsequent role as Director of Statistical Analysis for the Ministry of Social Development, Ricardo had prominent roles in the United Nations Development Programme, becoming the senior economics advisor in 2010. In the UNDP, he was the lead author of the very first Africa Human Development Report of 2011 to 12. From the UNDP, he moved to his current role in Oxfam. And with this wealth of experience behind him and dedication to the issue of economic development, it is with delight that I am welcoming on stage Mr. Ricardo Fuentes Nieva for his talk entitled "Keeping an Eye in the Have More Concentration of Income and Political Capture." Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm not that old as all that kind of things that were mentioned kind of suggest. I'm very pleased to be here. I want to first of all thank the organizers, Marshall Society, Lawrence, who were very helpful to organize all this, and congratulate you for this first kind of a conference of this sort. It's been very well organized, and it's very exciting to see all these young people committed to spend the Saturday and come from different parts of the country, spend some money, and come and dedicate your time to these issues. This week, we released a report. It's called Working for the Few. We changed the title slightly late. In that report, we explore the issue of concentration of income and wealth and political capture. And basically the things that we're trying to explore there are how all these trends that we've been discussing during the day, where are the major threats to the progress that we see? And one of the things that we've identified is how, say, over the past 30 years or 35 years, there's been an increased concentration of income in the hands of few, and how that can distort the political process and then threaten democracies, how it can kind of generate some kind of sclerosis in the economic system and the like. So basically, what we did was we did a series of analysis of data. So the first thing that we did is we took the Credit Suisse report on wealth, and we look at the decile distribution of wealth around the world. And it turns out that the bottom 50% of the population in the world holds only around 0.70% of the total wealth, which amounts to $1.7 trillion, 2013 $trillion. And then we add up the wealth of the richest people according to the Forbes list. And we identify that, if you take the bottom 50% of the population, and you take the 85 richest people in the world, they have the same wealth. 85 people in the world have the same wealth as the bottom half of the world. So that's the kind of world where we stand. It's a world where a massive concentration of wealth. Using other sources, it suggests that concentration of wealth is increasing. Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened here. This is using a different data source. This is the percentage increase in share of income for the richest 1%. This is income, this is not wealth. Between 1980 and 2012. We can see the data that we have is we have the data for 26 countries with some information in this period. For 24 of those 26 countries, the share of income of the top 1% is increasing. And you can see dramatic increases, for instance, in the US. Countries that we usually think as very egalitarian, like Sweden and Norway, have seen a massive increase in the share of income going to the top 1%. All kinds of ranges. France, which, I mean, is notably a small increase, but still. The only two countries that haven't seen an increase are the Netherlands and Colombia. And Colombia is still a very large share of the pie goes to the richest 1%, it's around 20%. So I guess my first couple of points is that the level of concentration of wealth is enormous. That it shows that 85 people, and the media team came up with a catchy kind of way of presenting it. So these 85 people, they all fit in a double-decker bus. These 85 people hold as much wealth as the bottom half of the world. And not only that, so that's the level right now. The trend shows that this is increasing, and it's increasing dramatically. It's increasing since the 1980s. Something happened in the 1980s, the Reagan-Thatcher revolution kind of changed the way, and there are other factors, like globalization and liberalization of the financial services. But what we've seen is there's been 3 decades of this trend, and it's only now when we've been noticing this, and when places like Davos is paying a lot of attention to the issue of income inequality. And what we're trying to do is basically illuminate the issue. So this is a different type of graph. Basically shows here we show the growth. In the previous graph, we were showing the growth between these and these. But just to illustrate that, also the levels. And then you might say, well, these graphs are based on tax records. Tax records, it's a fantastic database collected by economists from the Paris School of Economics, Berkeley University, and Oxford University. Sorry for that. And they used existing tax records to identify what's the share of income going to the top 1%. But interestingly, it's mostly countries with a well-working tax system where you can use that information. So one of the criticisms that we received when we were writing the paper was, but this doesn't hold for middle-income countries or poor countries. Well, it actually kind of does. So we took five populous middle-income countries and showed, based on World Bank data, how the share of income going to the highest 10% and the lowest 40% look like. And one of my colleagues, Duncan Green, who you probably know, got so excited when he saw these graphs that he wanted to overlay a crocodile with an opening jaw. But basically, we didn't let him. But I guess he's got a point, because what it shows is this increasing gap between the rich and the poor. It's also happening in middle-income countries. And over the days, different speakers have mentioned that income inequality is one of those kind of threats that people are discussing about in China, in Africa. We can see that it's happening in rich countries alike. It's happening in middle-income countries too. Pakistan, Nigeria. So the data is patchy, but we made a big effort to. Oops. What happened here? we made a big effort to use different sources of information. So, and we were challenging our assumptions, we were challenging our prior. So we used the Credit Suisse data report, the Wealth report, we used the tax returns, we used the World Bank, just to see if there were things that we were, if we were right on the trends that we were capturing. So we have a series of kind of like summary statistics in the report. Crunching some numbers, we came up with these facts. So 7 out of 10 people live in countries that have experienced an increase in income inequality. Say in the US, 95% of the economic gains after the crisis have gone to the top 1%, while the bottom 90%, and this includes a big chunk of the middle class, have become poorer. So it's not, this is one of the, for me, this is a way more striking fact than the 85 holds the bottom half of the same wealth as the bottom half of the world. Because what this is saying is that 90% of people in the US are becoming poorer, while the rich, the top 1%, are becoming way richer. And this is in place in a well-developed democracy, in a well-developed economic system such as the US. So the next thing is that we did is we used a poll that was conducted by Oxfam, and we identified. So what are the people's concerns? And we've been having some kind of like intense debates inside Oxfam and with external partners, because not all inequality is bad. There must be some sort of capacity to reward entrepreneurship and effort and talent, merit, all those things. And we very clearly recognize that we don't want an issue where the outcome is completely equalized. But what we're advocating for is it's a level playing field. And one element of that level playing field is a system that provides opportunities and for everyone, and a political system that actually takes into account the views of everyone, or the views of the majority. And our concern is that this massive concentration of income and wealth that we're seeing over the past 30 years actually is undermining that political process. And when we were using this poll, we asked it in 6 different countries. And one of the questions we ask is, the rich have too much influence over where this country is headed? So a majority of people in the 6 countries actually agreed with that. So it's in the public discourse. It's in the public discourse where, this worry, and it was reflected in the Occupy Wall Street movement. It's been reflected in Obama's speech on inequality on December 4th, and it's been reflected in even Davos, even the people meeting at Davos this week reacted to this. So we were very surprised. The paper was released on Monday. Yesterday, it made it to the Daily Show in the US. It made it to the Now show. I didn't know that show even existed, but now I know. So it's what we've learned from this week is that the issue has resonance with people, and it has resonance, because people are realizing that this is a big problem. So the next step for us is actually say, well, how is this transmitting into political influence? How is this concentration of income, this growing concentration of income and wealth, transmitting into undue political influence? And then we took the case of the US, where, the share of income of the top 1%, the data for that share of income goes back to the late 1800s. And we look at how financial deregulation move with the share of income going to, this is pre-tax. And then we can see, they move along quite well. And as Adam Gopnik from the New Yorker say, correlation doesn't mean causation, but for sure hits on something. So we see that, there's a high correlation on how they move. The income of the biggest, the richest in the U.S. and issues of financial deregulation. And then the question is, how is this happening? Well, we identify different mechanisms: campaign finance, lobby, how they influence tax systems, and then we went to look at tax rates for different countries, not only for the U.S., and we look at the trends in the top marginal tax rate in different countries, and you can see this is declining very, very, very consistently for all the countries that we have information. These are not all the countries for which we have data. We have data for around 30 countries, and for 29 of them, the top marginal tax rate in the most recent year is lower than in the mid-70s. And some very renowned academics, Tony Atkinson, Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez, and Facundo Alvaredo, produced a report in the summer, a journal article in the Journal of Economic Perspectives that shows how the change in this top marginal tax rate actually correlates with the pre-tax share of income going to the top 1%, and they find a very striking correlation, and they suggest that it's an issue of bargaining power, how the people at the top have more bargaining power to actually kind of negotiate their pre-tax salaries. So what this means is that there's a group of people, a small group of people, that are capturing a larger share of the pie, and they're paying less taxes on it. So, and this is something that's happening around many countries in the world. So you might say, well, I mean, but that's the nature of the political systems. Always the rich have more voice. Always wealth can buy power, and there's nothing new on that. And the response that we have to that is, well, but that's changing. And that's one of the threats that we identify. All the gains that we've seen over the past even 200 years in terms of democratic progress and voice and accountability and the like can be reversed by these trends. I'm not saying it will, but it certainly can, because the kind of levels that we observe in terms of concentration of income, we hadn't seen them in 100 years in some countries. So these are things that we go way back to around the First World War, or the Roaring '20s in the U.S. And the thing that worries us is that once the political system is captured, once the political system is actually kind of represents the views of a small minority, then the whole playing field actually becomes distorted, and then the people who are born at the bottom of the distribution never have actually an opportunity. So this is a process that following the lead of Charles Tilly we call opportunity hoarding, and what we see is, say for instance, we have this correlation again. This is social mobility against the Gini coefficient. And what we can see is that countries with very high Gini coefficients have a very low social mobility. So basically what this means is, once this process starts, the process of reinforcing inequality, then the people who are at the bottom won't have a chance to use their talent or their effort or their merit to progress in the scale. So basically, all that idea that outcomes are the result of our choices and our decisions become a much less credible story, and that's what's worrying. So we find we released this paper. We found all that evidence. This is something that we're working a lot, and interestingly, it's something that there's a lot of new evidence coming out. There's a new paper that was released, I think, on Thursday that challenges this graph. I haven't read the paper. I read the abstract. I haven't read the paper, but I will, and then I'll see what it means for this. It has captured the public imagination. As I said, our report was cited in I think it was like 4,000 different media outlets in 1 week. I never thought that would happen, but it did. And well, what that shows us is that we have a space to continue working on this. We have a space to have these kind of conversations in fora like this to actually discuss what it means, to actually discuss what needs to be done. We have a series of recommendations, and those recommendations are kind of like very generic, but I mean they're evident. Progressive taxation, better investment in public services, monitoring the growth of the income of the share of income of the top 1% and the like. But I mean, I wanted to keep this presentation short so I could hear from you on your thoughts and have a conversation about this. Given that it's a hot topic, given that in Davos, I was talking to Peter yesterday, inequality was the center of the discussion. There is a belief that Obama will focus his State of the Union on Tuesday on the issue of inequality. So it's a good time to discuss this. So thank you very much. Thank you again for the invitation. It's a pleasure, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the presentation. We have time for a few questions, if anyone wants to kick off. Yeah.
Hello, Ricardo. I'm Alex. I'm just wondering, you seem to be saying that we currently have quite an elitist form of democracy, and that's having quite an impact on the wealth gap. So are you promoting a sort of pluralist form of democracy where maybe more groups have an involvement in the democratic process, really? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, in a way. I mean, what we're saying is that the growing wealth gap is polarizing the political process, and then it's excluding by almost by definition different groups. Because so there was a statistic in the New York Times that we didn't use in the report, but say half of the congressmen and congresswomen in the U.S. are now millionaires. And I know like being a millionaire doesn't mean much, but it gives you a sense of how much how much wealth actually determines whether you have a shot in a political career in the U.S. And that doesn't it's not exclusive to the U.S. And there's a lot of evidence that there's a book called by Martin Gilens called Affluence and Influence. So that's our concern, the fact that affluent people might have more influence and they might rig the system in their favor.
Yeah, at the back.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is, the word inequality has never been mentioned in my economics degree. Do you think that might have an influence on why we came to this fact that inequality became so big? Because we've never been talked about this, and this is not an issue. Also, Thomas Piketty, one of the authors of these great research, is coming to Cambridge in a few months. We invited him. We're super excited. Just an announcement. And something else. Now we're talking about development, and I feel like this is always an issue that has been on my mind. Like, for America or Europe, like this is definitely an issue, but like for developing countries, if you don't have a pie to share, why shouldn't you first focus on growth and then you'll focus on inequality? This is an argument that you hear often. Do you have anything against this to say?
On the first one, I mean, when I was doing my undergrad in Mexico and in economics, it was a very neoclassical approach, and I actually am very grateful for that because it was a great start to understand the issues. But I mean, the issue of income inequality and a neoclassical approach is just basically if you have, sorry for being like super technical, but if you have a Cobb Douglas, then the marginal return to capital and labor actually determines the wages and the rate of the productivity, the marginal productivity of capital and labor determines wages and the interest rate, the return to labor, to capital. So basically, I mean, it's something that it doesn't compute because I mean the distribution of income is actually a function of the production function that you have. So that's why, I mean, very often we're not concerned about income inequality, but the newest research, and Acemoglu and Robinson have done a lot on this, shows that I mean, there are strong political economy processes that determine the distribution of income, and I think that's something very important that needs to be included in curriculums. So that's one. On the Piketty, please invite me. I mean, he's coming out with a new book, which is a fantastic new book. I read it. I read parts of it in French, and it's coming out in English in a couple of months. It's called The Capital in the 21st Century. Yeah. So he's trying to kind of like solve the things that Marx couldn't solve because he didn't have data. But I mean, I think the kind of work that Piketty is doing is fantastic because he's illuminating a lot of these problems. One of the things he's saying is, well, basically the capital. I mean, the returns to capital are becoming larger than economic growth. So there's kind of a stagnation in society because inheritance plays a big role. And then the obvious response is taxing the states, inheritance taxes and things like that. So it's a really interesting book on on whether countries should grow first and then distribute. I've never liked that argument because you have lock-in effects where, I mean, if you grow in a very uneven way, then the institutions are developed around that type of growth, and then it's very hard to change those institutions. And we saw it in Latin America. It took. I mean, Latin America was a region where income inequality was very high, and it took a long time, to actually kind of like break that. And now it's happening, but I mean, why would you want to do that if you can do it in a different way?
About the income inequality in less developed countries and the influence that corruption has on this, do you believe that more developed and Western countries, so to speak, need to make an active effort to reduce corruption in these less developed countries as an ulterior form of aid? And what effect will that have on the income inequality if they actually pursue that sort of approach?
That's a tricky one because I think that institutions need to evolve nationally and organically. So it's the people in the countries who need to kind of actually demand more inclusive institutions. And the question is like, well, if they have no space, how do they do that? And I think, I mean, the most interesting kind of discussion is around international movements, how international movements can create the space for local civil society to actually start putting pressure on national governments to create more inclusive institutions. But it's definitely just an idea. So it's a tricky one. But I wouldn't be a proponent of developed countries trying to create inclusive institutions in less developed countries, because I think that hasn't worked in the past, and there's a lot of questions about how inclusive the institutions in rich countries are right now, or the trend where they're moving.
Last two.
So you spoke about how when we suggest economic policies to a lot of these countries, nothing really happens because the lobbying power of these wealthy groups is actually really strong. Do you then suggest that we should encourage political reforms as opposed to, or at least in conjunction with economic reforms, to things like limiting the amount of funding political parties can get and providing this funding by governments as opposed to lobbying groups? And do you think that'll be much more effective in terms of the long-term progress of economic development?
That's a very good question. I think it's a bit of both. And when I was doing the research for this paper, I read a speech by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He gave this speech, I think, in April 1938, and it's a speech when he's, I mean, it's a speech to Congress where he's trying to break the monopolies. And he's saying, well, I mean, basically, when we have this concentration of economic might in the hands of few, our democracy is at peril. It's a fantastic speech. And what Roosevelt did was, like, I mean, he pushed for the antitrust law. So there was a regulation there. But that regulation, I mean, it was a political reform that changed the economic system. So I mean, I think you need both at some point. And then the question is, and to be quite honest, I don't have an answer for this. So Roosevelt was able to do that in the aftermath of the Great Depression, and a lot of the social protection and progressive taxation schemes that we see all around the world happen, you know, either as a consequence of the First or the Second World War or the Great Depression. And then the real question is how can those things happen without a major shock like that? You know what I mean? And I think that's what we're exploring, like Oxfam. How can we change that trend without these massive disruptions? You know, I mean, we're not waiting for that to happen.